Well, it's Thursday night on BBC One. The coronavirus newscast follows in an hour, but right now, and later than scheduled, we join Fiona Bruce.
Welcome to Question Time. On tonight's panel, Chris Philp, entrepreneur turned politician, elected as an MP in 2015 and now the government's Justice Minister. Mayor of Greater Manchester and former Labour Health Secretary Andy Burnham, he joins us down the line from Manchester. Helle Thorning-Schmidt, former Prime Minister of Denmark and leader of the Social Democrats there. She is currently on the oversight board of Facebook. Associate editor of the Daily Telegraph, specialising in politics and the royals, Camilla Tominey. And award-winning playwright and screenwriter, author of Brexit, the Uncivil War quiz. And on the stage, This House and Ink, James Graham. Good evening and welcome to my guests here in the studio and, of course, to Andy, who's joining us down the line. So tonight we're going to have a mixture of live and pre-recorded questions, this time from our contributors in London. I'll also be bringing in comments and questions via social media. You can join the conversation, as always, at BBC Question Time on social media. So let's take our first question tonight, which is from Claire Cooper.
Hello. Even if some children do get back to school before the end of the summer term, their experience is more likely to be about social distancing and hygiene, rather than anything of any educational value. What can the panel suggest for a whole generation of school children who are now missing nearly half an academic year and face months of distrust about social distancing and social contact and the face of further disruption?
Andy, let's start with you. There's obviously some schools are going to go back around on the 1st of June, some are not. What's happening where you are?
It's a mixed picture, Fiona. As you say, some are going back. Some have said they'd rather take their time to get the right arrangements in place. I mean, I agree. We want to get the kids back in school if we can, as quickly as possible. But it's got to be done as safely as possible. And the key thing is here, schools haven't closed. It's as if they've not been doing anything over recent weeks. Of course, they've been looking after children of key workers. And I think teachers are feeling a bit stressed from the teacher bashing they've seen this week. So I think we need to sort of de-escalate this row a little bit. The problem is the government dropped a date on people of the 1st of June without any real consultation. And I think the way to resolve this is to say to head teachers in consultation with councils, try and get back by the 1st of June, but as soon as you feel is safely possible. And that feels to me to be the right resolution from where we are today.
Camilla?
Well, I've got 3 school-age children, a Year 6 child, a Year 2 child and a Year 5 child. So one of them can go back, the eldest, Year 6, and I've been asked by her school if I want her to go back, and I've said yes. So we have half term and then I'll have one of my 3 children back and the other 2 at home. That consequently means that one of us needs to be at home with the children, so work can't go back to normal. If I had been asked if all of the children should go back, I'd have said yes.
So you don't have the safety fears that we heard from some teachers and some of the unions. That's not an issue for you? Not
really, because first of all, I've been impressed so far with what the schools are coming up with in terms of how they're going to socially distance the children, what measures they're going to take coming in. We've had a massive dossier for the eldest talking about washing hands, having temperature checks at the door and how they're going to be separated in class. But equally, and I know there is some lack of consensus over the evidence that we have so far as to how infectious children are. It's plausible that they aren't as infectious as adults, but it's perhaps not proven. However, there have been a number of studies. There's been studies in Australia, studies in Finland, studies of a child who interacted after coming back from the French Alps and having coronavirus with hundreds of other children and didn't pass it on. The chief scientist of the WHO has said that schools should go back. We've seen schools go back in parts of Europe. I did a story with the BMA this week that cited the spike in northern France. But actually the foreign minister there pointed out that 1.4 million children had gone back. There had been 70 cases, but most of them had been contracted outside of school.
But the BMA were initially supporting the unions in saying that schools shouldn't go back.
They would, and my newspaper, The Telegraph, ran a piece with them yesterday where they somewhat softened that stance and said that schools should go back on June the 1st if it's safe to do so. So from some of the evidence I've seen, I feel happy with my eldest going back, and if the other two were invited to go back, I would say yes. I do have sympathy with teachers, but we have to consider that the infection rate before the lockdown came in would have been higher than it is now. And arguably, teachers could be more at risk going to the supermarket than into classrooms. I think measures should be taken, but I'm satisfied we've got to the point, and I believe that SAGE, that informed government that it was the right time to say a phased return to school from June the 1st. I understand they're going to be releasing more of their evidence tomorrow. We need to see that evidence. So far, it's not been transparent enough, which has led to this confusion.
So, Helle, let's talk about the experience in Denmark, because Denmark was the first country in Europe to reopen its schools. So why was the decision taken then, and how's it worked?
Well, I think it's very hard to compare the UK with Denmark. Denmark is a much smaller country, and we have a different political system, which I hope I can talk a little bit more about, based on much more compromise, consultation, and of course, we could never send children back to school without deep consultation with teachers' unions, with head teachers, and also parents, of course. But it did actually, they succeed in sending children back. And one thing I was really impressed with, and I, as Prime Minister, I had my fair share of, should we call it, debates with the teachers' union. But one thing I was really impressed by was how innovative they suddenly all became. They invented new ways of going to school. They had outdoor schools. Copenhagen teamed up with cultural facilities all over town. So suddenly you saw kids having education in our national stadium. They started out singing the national anthem. After that, they had their class in the VIP lounge. You saw kids, 5-year-olds, having their education or having their classroom in the National Museum of Art.
So do you think we could be doing that kind of thing here?
Why not? I mean, we have empty museums, we have empty theatres, we have empty sports facilities. Why not use those facilities and give a different kind of education? And what I am seeing in Danish schools, yesterday I just saw report children who are getting sailing education in the sea. So why not actually use this time to think differently about education and team up? But it can only be done by local authorities. It can't be dictated by the government. And that's another reason why I think the government needs to have much more consultation with the four nations of this country, with the local authorities, with cities, to make sure that this can happen in a smooth way. And I would really advise to take the heat out of this, because nothing good comes from this row that has been we've seen over the last week.
And James, your mother works in school, doesn't she?
She does, yeah. So she's an office manager in a primary school up in North Nottinghamshire. So she's been doing a lot of the things that we're talking about, making these preparations. They're nervous, but they're trying to adapt and be inventive. She's been ordering in the pedal bins for tissues for when kids sneeze. They've been measuring out how the desks might work in different classrooms. But I think it's important to say, obviously, that every local authority is completely different, and every school within every local authority is completely different. There are big classes and there are small classes. There are areas of great resource and areas of great deprivation. And I think it is incumbent on our politicians to empower headmasters and teachers, because they know what's best for their children in their schools. And I don't necessarily see the need for a uniform, standardised, nationwide rollout. I think the dates and the times and the methods need to be decided by the teachers. But I really love what you said, Helle, about the using of cultural institutions to contribute to the positive learning of children. I think, Claire, you mentioned it in your question. We have a whole generation here who are sat at home with these incredibly eager minds and these desires to be learning. And I think that's definitely one thing that the theatre industry in its lockdown has been reasonably good at. Education departments have been continuing to function and to work with teachers to get actors sat at home and musicians sat at home to inspire kids in that way. You know, unfortunately, we're not going to be able to open anytime soon, and I think it's incumbent upon us to try and find as inventive and as exciting a way to keep our kids stimulated as possible.
I mean, Chris, it's turned into a bit of a mess, hasn't it, this 1st of June announcement? Because, I mean, you heard Andy saying, no consultation, and Helle was talking about, try and take the heat out of this. You've got a situation now where we're on the 1st of June. At the moment, anyway, it looks like there'll be, 1,000, possibly 2,000 schools that just aren't going to open. So this rollout that the government wanted is not going to be happening.
Well, I think there was plenty of advance notice. The measure was announced a few weeks ago. in response to scientific advice.
Were schools given advance notice?
Helle mentioned, well, as Camilla said, there's a load more advice and scientific evidence going to be published tomorrow for all of us to have a look at. On Helle's point about the constituent nations of the United Kingdom, of course, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland chart their own course. But as far as England is concerned, we are following the advice we've been given. It is really important, when safe, to get children back into school for exactly the reason that Claire mentioned in her question. I'm worried that there are children who are missing out on education, children particularly from disadvantaged backgrounds who are at risk of falling behind in their studies. So as soon as we safely can, I think it is important to get children back into the classroom. Of course, at no point are we going to take any risks with anyone's health, the children's, the teachers, the parents, or anyone. That's why the advice is so important. It'll get published tomorrow. There'll be further confirmation, I think, coming next week. But if it is safe to go back on the 1st of June, as we currently believe it is, then I would encourage all schools to do that in a safe way to make sure that children don't fall behind. We don't want any child to get left behind, particularly those from disadvantaged backgrounds.
But do you think
all work together to make that happen.
It would have been more likely to be successful if head teachers had known about the 1st of June before it was announced to the nation at large? I mean, the Union of Head Teachers says the first they knew about the 1st of June was when they heard it on the television.
Well, I mean, obviously, there are thousands of head teachers and tens or hundreds of thousands of teachers, so it's very difficult to sort of selectively announce it to tens of thousands of people. They have teaching unions.
Well, hang on a minute, because you've got the Department for Education. That's exactly what they can do. You're saying the only way to tell schools was to do it through the press conference?
I think if you make an announcement to 10,000 odd head teachers, then you've effectively made the announcement publicly. So, but I mean, teaching unions have been closely consulted about the science. They've been on calls where government scientific advisors have briefed them on that. And I would urge teaching unions and their members to positively and constructively engage with schools to find safe ways of going back. As James said a moment ago, that will be different for different schools because their geography and their classroom layouts are going to be different. But the important thing is we make sure no children get left behind. And I'd just like to add to what James said. I think your idea about seeing if we can use these empty cultural institutions is a really interesting idea, and that is definitely worth exploring because, as you said, sadly, many of our great institutions like theatres and museums aren't being used. And if we can find a way of safely getting children into those, that would be a great and enriching experience for them, for sure.
And Andy, I'm just wondering what parents are supposed to make. You've got Camilla, who very much wants to send her children to school. You've got a number of schools who are embracing, happily or not, and it's difficult to say from the systems, but are planning to go ahead with the 1st of June opening, and then lots of schools that aren't. What are parents supposed to make it? Is it that some schools are less risk-averse than others, or some have made better preparation? How can parents make any kind of decent assessment?
I think they're probably a little confused by it all, Fiona, to be honest, because it's a row that's been going on for the last few days, and I'm not sure that helps parents. I would agree with Helle. Put head teachers in the driving seat here and let them make the judgment about when it's safe to open the school, because parents will probably look most to the head teacher for advice about safety of their kids. I think it also should be done in consultation with local councils, because the fact is the circumstances will differ from one place to another in terms of the teaching staff. Some of them may be self-isolating, there may be issues that they have to deal with amongst the staff. There'll be physical circumstances within the school. But then don't forget, of course, Fiona, that the R rate, the R number, the reproduction number varies from one region to another. Here in the north of England, we've seen a higher R number than in the south. So you can't blame any council for taking a cautious approach. And that's why I say to the government, work in partnership with local councils. Absolutely say to them, let's get schools open on the 1st of June if we can. But we respect the fact that if you think a little longer is needed to get the arrangements in place, then so be it, and we'll work with you in partnership on that. But let's get away from teacher bashing. We've seen too much of that over the last few weeks. They have been working really hard through this period, often teaching kids at home and being innovative in all the ways we would want them to be. And I think we need to sort of de-escalate this row and focus on practical steps to get kids back in school when it's safe to do so.
Let me read you some of the comments we had in on social media. Lawrence says, if it's safe for children to go back to school, why isn't it safe at the House of Commons?
Well, we're heading
back. Or
are
children test subjects?
No, not at all. We're heading back. There was a vote in Parliament yesterday, and from the 2nd of June onwards, so that's a day later, these arrangements to vote remotely are being ended, and we will be going back in, because it is important that our national parliament does its job, scrutinising what the government is doing, properly asking questions. Things like bill committees and delegated legislation committees haven't been sitting, so let's get parliament working, showing leadership and doing what we're asking everybody else to do, which is go to work if you safely can.
Andy, you wanted to come in?
Can I just come in, Fiona, and say I think it was a really poor decision taken by MPs this week. We're not asking schools to come fully back. We're asking them to come back on an interim basis. But for Parliament to vote to come back completely, I think sets a really poor example to the country. And let's remember, Westminster was a hotbed for the spread of the virus just a few weeks ago. Sometimes with Parliament, it's a case of do as we say, not as we do. And I just don't think it's acceptable. It doesn't suggest to me that the premier workplace in the country is taking a safety-first approach.
Just to correct that, I mean,
briefly, Chris, because I need to go back to
functioning as we normally do. There will be different arrangements for things like voting, so it won't be business as usual, but MPs will be doing their job.
OK. Camilla?
Well, Claire was talking, I think, in her question as well about well-being of children and this sense that, yes, it will be different when they go back. They will be socially distancing. I don't quite know how the curriculum might match up to what it might have been if we weren't in this situation. But the bottom line is that children miss their friends and they miss that social interaction. And for children that have been all right at home and are in safe and loving homes, they've been OK, and maybe they can last until September with not too much damage. What's happened here, though, is that the government expected 20% attendance levels at schools throughout lockdown. They hoped that all vulnerable children and a lot of children of key workers would attend. Actually, what happened is less than 2% of children attended. And I'm quite involved with a charity called the National Association for the Children of Alcoholics, and their calls are going exponentially through the roof. I did a show with Esther Ranson the other day, and she was saying Childline had been inundated. So we do have to weigh up the risks here. Yes, there is a risk to children, perhaps, of contracting COVID-19 and spreading it to vulnerable adults, and that's not something we want. But what is the risk to vulnerable children for remaining in homes where they may be facing abuse or other problems which greatly affect their well-being, much, much more, frankly, than being socially distanced in a classroom?
I think that's an important point to think about. And what is actually the consequence for children who can't go to school? What we know, we knew that very well when I was CEO of Save the Children, that if children don't go to school, they basically forget everything they learned the full year. Yeah. So we will have children who, I mean, practically lose a whole year of education because they simply can't remember what they learned 6 months ago. So I'm a little bit worried that if it lasts too long, we will be taking a little bit of the children's future twice. First, we will take almost a year out of their education, and then we're also handing them a very, very large bill for a lockdown, which has become very, very expensive. So there is these balances to find, but I would just again say find a good balance with also the teachers and take the heat out of it. The only way this can be solved is by being pragmatic.
Claire, what do you think of what you've heard? What's your view?
Well, I quite like Helle's idea of using venues creatively. I think what I fear is that the value of education will have been taken away from children. And I think this is every child. It's children from reception right up to the sixth formers that have lost out on their A-levels and are actually grieving because of that. But also, I think what I fear is that children, there will be a distrust about social contact. This term maybe, but going into the next academic year. And I think the value and the trust of the way that schools were before they broke up in the middle of March has disappeared. And I feel profoundly sad and worried for those children. I'm a psychologist. I don't work in education, but I can see the psychological damage that potentially is happening to a whole generation of children.
Well, Claire, thank you very much for your question. Thank you for joining us live. Let's go to Alfie now, who has another question for us. Yes, Alfie.
Hi. Test, track and trace sounds really, really important. But what will be in place on the 1st of June will be missing many components, including the contact tracing app. So when can we expect to see the full implementation of test, track and trace.
And of course, its full implementation is, well, according to the government anyway, is critical in terms of easing the lockdown and getting children back to school. So when are we going to see test, track and trace fully implemented? Not just kind of the beginnings of it, Chris, but fully implemented.
Yeah, so look, we've seen the new app being tested in the Isle of Wight. Of course, we've learned from that experience, and one of the things we've learned is that we can effectively deploy test, track and trace with the manual tracers. We've recruited 24,000 of those already. We'll be up to the full complement of 25,000 by the 1st of June. So the service will be fully operational on the 1st of June and able to track and trace 10,000 people a day. That's 4 times more roughly than the number of cases we're finding each day from the 1st of June onwards. The app, we think, will be ready to deploy a few weeks after that, but the two are complementary and the system will work comprehensively from the 1st of June, which is one of the government's critical tests. And it will help us learn more about the way this disease spreads. It'll help us stop it spreading any further. It is a really important step forward in the way we're dealing with this disease, and it's good news. Just to be clear, because there have been a number of deadlines that have slipped, but you're sounding very confident. Possibly rightly so. I'm in no position to judge, but very confident on the 1st of June, it is going to hit the ground running. I mean, South Korea, of course, is always cited as the great example of contact tracing, and they had a flare-up in a nightclub at the beginning of the month, and they traced 65,000 people to find 170 new infections, and then each one was quarantined. Is that the kind of level of contact tracing the government's going to be able to do from the 1st of June? Well, the capacity will be 10,000 traces every day, and the Prime Minister in the House of Commons on Wednesday was absolutely categoric that we are ready to go on the 1st of June. As I say, we need 25,000 people to do it. 24,000 of those have been recruited already, and we'll get to 25,000 by the 1st of June, so we are going to get there. But at the same time... And even if we don't have the app there, so the app seems to be having a few teething problems, from what one can ascertain. Yeah, I mean, it's being tested in the Isle of Wight, and it's being refined. So having the app is not critical to contact tracing? Because it sounded like it was the next big thing, but we're not going to be having it on 1st of June. So the experience in the Isle of Wight shows that you can do effective contact tracing without the app, but the app is obviously helpful. It adds something to it, and we'll get that in a few weeks' time. At the same time, there are all kinds of other innovations happening. Matt Hancock this afternoon talked about a new test being beginning to get deployed today that gives you a result within 20 minutes. We've heard about advances with antibody testing today as well. So the science is really beginning to catch up with this disease. And for me, the science is really what gives me hope for the future. Hope that we can move beyond these strange circumstances of the last few weeks and return to something of a normal life as the months go by. So, Helle, when we look at the example of Denmark has obviously blazed a bit of a trail in terms of returning to a normal life. You started the lockdown very early. I think either you'd had no deaths at that, or Denmark had no deaths at that point, possibly one, whereas the UK started after 350 deaths. And your lockdown only lasted a month. And you've now eased it. So in terms of test, track and trace, how important was that in terms of Denmark being able to cope with the pandemic? Well, first of all, I think it's very, very hard. I think it would be difficult to find someone who thought it was a good idea to wait a full week, a good week in the UK to lock down. The lockdown simply came too late in this country, and I think that caused a lot of damage. Because actually it was 335 deaths in the UK. And was it 0 or 1 death in Denmark? I'm not sure. But it wasn't many. But they realised it was a big deal, and they locked down, and they did that a good week before the UK. And there's no doubt that the UK should have done the same. The other thing, I think, and looking at Germany, for example, which is a stellar example here, is that they started their testing and their tracing and their quarantine much earlier. So that means that even though they locked down more or less the same time as the UK, they were at a different place in their curve, and that basically meant that they have come out of this much better than the UK. And I'm not sitting here to criticise the government, that's not why I'm here, but I think we have to learn from these things and just be completely honest that, of course, UK locked down too late, and if this tracing had been up and running much before, I think the country could have opened much before. So the key to, and also in Denmark, we had a much softer lockdown. So we locked down before, softer lockdown. Now we're starting the tracking and tracing and quarantining as well. And the next question we have to find out is how are we going to quarantine these people? How is this actually going to happen? And again, a little idea from our own country. They're offering to use some of the hotels that have no guests to help people isolate. So they, at the cost of the government,
can be isolated in hotels. So there has to be plans for this, pragmatic plans that can be rolled out, and it has to be ramped up pretty fast. And I have no doubt it was ramped up earlier. UK would have been safer.
Do you agree with any of that?
Well, look,
lockdown too late?
Look, I mean, it's very hard to make comparisons.
And testing should have been started earlier.
It's very hard to make these comparisons between countries because demographics are very different. As Helle said at the beginning, Denmark is a relatively small country. We have the biggest city in Europe, London.
No, I get all that. But the UK still has the highest number of excess deaths at its peak of any country in Europe, according to a study from Oxford University. So by any margin, whether we're the worst or the second worst or the third worst, it's not... There probably aren't many countries looking at the UK saying that's the way to do it, I would tentatively suggest.
I just think it's very difficult to make those comparisons when you've got to account for demographics, the age of the population, pre-existing health conditions, concentrations like London, a city of almost 9 million people. All of those things are different in different countries. London is a unique city within Europe. Manchester as well, of course.
But Helle's specific point about the lockdown was too late.
But look, the government...
I'm just wondering, do you accept that, yes or no?
No, the government's advisor, Sage, gave very clear legal advice, health advice, scientific advice, and the government followed that scientific advice. That was the right thing to do.
James?
I mean, of course, I agree that it's vital that it rolls out as effectively and as soon as possible, not just because of our safety, but I think also because people need that sense of confidence that they can return as we begin opening up the economy again. The most vulnerable sectors of our economy are the ones that require people to be physically close to one another, whether that's restaurants, pubs, bars, and obviously hospitality, arts and entertainment. And I think there'll be a huge benefit to a test that can give an answer in 20 minutes for, say, film and television production. It's not the most important thing in the world, I know, but it's a vital sector, and it's got lots of people through the lockdown, and people are going to start to see the autumn schedules clearing themselves of British dramas. So that would be incredible to have confidence that you can get actors and crew on a set. Actors need to kiss each other, they need to fight each other, they need to hug each other, unless you want really, really terrible dramas. And so you know, this stuff does matter. It's not the priority, but I think a confidence that people can work safely, and that tourists and that people who are returning to our city centres and our town centres can eat and drink and reinvest in the economy is incredibly vital.
It should probably be pointed out, to be fair, that the lockdown did come in time for the peak. So there is an argument to say that if we'd locked down earlier, whether people would have psychologically been ready for it and obeyed it. And if you see the lockdown coming in on March the 23rd, it was about 10 days later that you see that spike. So
but the peak follows the lockdown. You don't have the peak.
Of course it follows the lockdown, but
the lockdown doesn't coincide with, isn't timed with the peak. The peak follows the lockdown.
The peak does follow the lockdown, but there was an argument at the time, if you think about it, it was only the week before, and rightly or wrongly, and decisions will now be made about future events, but only the week before there were thousands at Cheltenham. So every step of the way the government has had to look at the psychology of the public on it. Having said that, I spoke to a Tory MP this week who likened the confusion over timing, or perhaps everything seeming back to front, to that Morecambe and Wise sketch with Andre Previn, where he says, "You're not playing all of the right notes," and Eric Morecambe says, "I am playing all of the right notes, just not necessarily in the right order." And I think from the public perspective, what people have seen is they've asked themselves, well, why are you doing this now? The quarantine thing, for instance. Lots of people are saying, well, OK, you're quarantining flights now. Why on earth...
Well, not yet, but talking about
soon.
It.
Why on earth didn't you quarantine them at the beginning of this crisis? The messaging around the Prime Minister addressing the public about the loosening of the restrictions before actually releasing the paperwork describing how people should go back to work seemed to be the wrong way around. The test, track and trace. It's great that we've got this technology, but that exercise Cygnus did identify 3 years ago the problems that would be faced by this country in the event of a global pandemic. So people are asking themselves, why has the timing come so late? Why is it that countries like South Korea were on top of this at the beginning of the pandemic hitting their nation, whereas we only seem to be getting to grips with some of that technological response at the end of it?
Well, one of the reasons why quarantine is going to come in now at the end of the pandemic rather than in the middle of it is because when the number of cases in circulation in the population are so much larger than those being brought in by air passengers, there's no point in having a quarantine. They represented less than 0.5% of the caseload. Now that our domestic caseload is going down and there is some prospect that air travel will go up, it becomes relatively more important, and so measures like quarantine become significant. But on the general response, I mean, there are so many things that people said would go wrong that have been actually handled very well. For example, about 8 weeks ago, people said we'd run out of ventilators. In fact, we've got 13,000 ventilators, and never more than half of them have been in use. People said we might run out of intensive care beds. We've nearly doubled the number of intensive care beds, and no more than half of those have ever been in use by coronavirus patients. So all of those aspects of the response, which include the relationship to the timing, have worked in this country very well. And I think that we can all collectively take some pride in the way that as a nation we've come together. We've worked together on this lockdown. It's been difficult. It's been difficult for children, for families, for people at work, for the arts sector, for older people. It's been tough for all of us. But we've worked together. We've been disciplined. And thankfully now we are moving into a slightly happier phase ahead. And I think we can take collective national pride in the way we've worked together on that. Andy?
Well, certainly I've tried to work with the government. I've tried to give them the benefit of the doubt through this. I understand how difficult the challenge is that they're dealing with, and I have a lot of sympathy with that. But they seem to me to be repeating the same mistakes throughout this. The first is that sometimes the rhetoric is running ahead of the reality. We saw that on testing, we saw it on PPE, and I think we're seeing it again now with this. From what I know here in Greater Manchester, there will not be a world-beating system in place by the 1st of June, as the Prime Minister seemed to suggest yesterday.
So what makes you, because obviously Chris is saying it will be, and what makes you say that, Andy?
They just appointed the Chief Executive of Leeds about 10 days, 2 weeks ago, to try and integrate the local knowledge with this new national system. And he's working through that at the moment, and it's complicated. And as I say, from what I know, it will be beginning by then, but it will nowhere near be in place. And I just feel that 1st of June date is kind of going back to that conversation we were just having about schools. Really, schools should only be really reopening when this was fully and properly in place. The second mistake, Fiona, if I could just touch on this as well. You know, there is a lot of local expertise on these issues, but throughout this, the government has almost kind of disregarded that and kind of rushed to stand up its own national systems and sign contracts with private entities and then try and build something from scratch. And I think we're seeing that here, and there's some doubts about the quality of the training being provided. You know, they really should have kind of used the local expertise first and built from there. And I just feel that the government is making problems for itself by not sort of learning from some of those earlier mistakes and then going down a different path. So I think we're getting there, is the way I would describe it. But I think the government should be honest with people. That would be a better policy. It's going to be late June before this system is fully up and running.
Now, Alfie, this was your question. Are you confident that it will be, the test, track and trace will be fully embedded by June the 1st? I mean, what was it that prompted your question in the first place?
Well, I'm a computer science student, and my experience of software engineering is things do go wrong. They go often wrong, and we're running out of time. And if you want to launch an app on the same day that school's open, you are asking for the worst.
Well, it sounds like we're probably not going to get the app on June the 1st. Is it? I'm just wondering if it's a question of interpretation, because you've got Alfie saying, you know, when will test, track and trace be fully embedded? And you're saying absolutely on June the 1st. You've got Andy saying, look, I think it'll be getting going on June the 1st, but fully embedded, up and running, you know, all bells and whistles, no. I mean, which is it in your view?
Well, the 25,000 people who are needed to operate the system and deliver 10,000 track and traces per day will be in place by the 1st of June. 24,000 of those 25,000 have been recruited already and are in advanced stages of training. So it will be ready to deploy on the 1st of June. As you said, Fiona, the app will be a few weeks after that, which will further augment the system, and we'll also learn a lot more about coronavirus by using it. But we are going to be ready to go on the 1st of June, and it will really help us understand how the disease spreads, and it'll help us control it, identify people who are in danger of catching it, and get them quarantined and then tested really quickly.
I mean, it sort of brings us full circle back to the first question with schools, actually, because you had a member of SAGE, you know, the body that advises the government, saying a well-functioning track and trace system needs to be embedded and working well before schools can reopen. So, Camilla, you're really keen for your kids to go back to school. The system's going to start on June the 1st, track and trace. I mean, you will see, you know, you're very confident, Chris, it's going to be kind of all systems go from the get-go. Do you have any concerns about that?
Well, from the perspective of all of the evidence pointing to children not being badly affected if they do catch it and not seemingly being as infectious as adults, and considering all of the measures that schools have been put in place to make sure that children are safe, and considering the fact that they are missing out on so much of their education by being at home, all of this is about assessing risk and weighing up the different probabilities. And I think on a balance of probabilities, overall, after now 2 months at home, with us trying to home educate them as well as we can while also working, I think that on balance, my children are better off in school. Yes, I do.
OK, let's take another question now from Gerald Armin.
Theatres were the first to close and will probably be the last to reopen, which is many, many months away, and which could also be the closure of many small independent theatres. Do you think the government should help by bailing us out?
Well, look, James, I'm obviously going to start with you as the playwright here on the panel.
Sure, and of course, I think it's really worth acknowledging up front, of course, that against a backdrop of huge strain on the NHS and the work of carers and these big questions we're asking about kids and when should they go back to school, they will, of course, always remain the primary focus. And that's right. But it's also right that as the country starts to get back on its feet, certain industries and certain companies are going to have to, that can contribute, as profitable industries, can contribute substantially to the revitalising and the reopening of Britain. It's incumbent upon us to sometimes have these difficult conversations with government, whereby we need to tell them the specific challenges that we're going to have in order to play that active role in reactivating the economy.
Well, look, you've got the government here in the form of Chris, the one-man government here. I mean, so do you want more bailouts? I mean, obviously the government has provided all sorts of money in terms of coronavirus interruption loans for business, that kind of thing. Is there a separate bailout that you would request from the government for theatres? So
the job retention scheme was an absolute lifesaver for so many people in my industry, the majority of whom are freelancers. It wasn't perfect, it didn't capture everybody, and I think that's something we need to look at. But yes, unfortunately, because as joyfully, over the next few months, according to your plan, pubs and restaurants and manufacturers and retailers start to be able to slowly reopen. That unfortunately isn't going to be the case with theatres and performing arts venues. We've tried our very best, but it's now apparent that there is no real viable social distancing model to get audiences safely, and it has to be safe, back into theatres to watch plays and musicals. I think you'd have to be 20% full if you did the measures, and they need to be about 80% full in order to sustain themselves economically. So that's just a problem, because the cultural sectors are so profitable. It's not like this is the 1970s and we're bailing out industries that are not profitable. I think the figure is about, for every £1 you invest in the arts, you get about £5 back. So we can't wait. We can't wait to be back doing that for you. And it's not a case that it's not an equivalent whereby arts funding costs hospital beds. We can pay for more hospital beds in our films and our television dramas and our theatres. But it's very likely, as Gerald was saying, that might not happen, possibly even up to including a year. So this time next year might be the first time we properly get to confidently reopen. So I guess what we need, possibly specifically, is possibly more flexibility, if it's possible, on the job retention scheme for sectors that will have zero income for many, many months. And then, unfortunately, yes, we do have to start asking for an investment package that will allow us to bridge this gap in the short term between not being able to open and then being able to open all guns blazing. Because what we have here, and we sort of, I think we're a bit squeamish. Gerald, you may disagree. I think sometimes we're a bit squeamish about the arts argument because we think it's an elitist thing, when in fact actually 1 in every 2 people go and see a play or a musical every year. You know, think of all the success stories when it comes to British films and British television dramas. There is such joyfully to be celebrated, there is such a global thirst for British content and British stories and all its wonderful modern mixed identity. But it's all interconnected. So just as a final point, for even people who don't go get to go to the theatre, that half of the country that doesn't go. And that was me growing up. And all I think about every night when I go to bed is how do I get that second half to go to the theatre. What I think people do enjoy, obviously, and has been a great benefit in lockdown, are all the television dramas that have entertained and provided mental health and well-being to a nation in lockdown. I was so privileged to be able to write and share Quiz, which was this drama about the Coughing Major scandal, and I was just delighted to hear families and audiences watching it and that helping people get it through. It's all connected. I come from theatre. Phoebe Waller-Bridge, who sold Fleabag to the world, comes from theatre. You will start to notice a difference if we can't be saved. And the facts are that without a bit of help, 70% of these theatres will be closed by Christmas and they won't be able to reopen.
So we've got a number. I mean, you've got the Globe, for example, says it won't survive without emergency funds. Obviously, the Globe in London, Southport Theatre Management, they've gone into liquidation. Nuffield, Southampton theatres, they've gone into administration. I mean, should there be a lifeline thrown to the arts, to the theatre by the government, do you think, Camilla?
Definitely. And I think that what's needed really in this timeline, and it was almost the kind of fuzziest of the announcements that were made last week in terms of the softening of the restrictions. There was a lot of stuff on sort of sporting events, but not much on cultural, and it wasn't very easily specified. And actually, I think if you want to give the theatre and creative arts industry a future, you've got to put a date on it so that the public can say, brilliant, from September, I can look forward to going back to the theatre.
But how can you put a date on it?
Well,
we can't predict how the pandemic is going to go.
Everything's conditional, but what was lacking completely is we heard about things that were happening in June, and we heard about hairdressers maybe getting back into business, thank goodness, from July, and we didn't hear anything about theatre or other cultural events. And I think it's important, you know, gigs and concerts. Now, I appreciate they're at the end of the scale because they are mass gatherings, and that's what's completely advised against right now. But if there were just a window, because I know from my own experience, I'm sure the panellists all agree, I wouldn't mind booking some things in to look forward to at Christmas. And that would give the theatre industry a lifeline, wouldn't it, if they were able to open bookings from a certain time. I appreciate the science on it is not straightforward, but I feel they've been cast adrift somewhat. And it's no wonder that people like James and his colleagues in that industry are in complete limbo, frankly, not knowing when on earth they can get back, not just to normal, but even the new normal that everyone's talking about.
The thing is, so we've got James and Camilla suggesting, you know, a bailout. I mean, Andy, I'm thinking, can the government afford it, though? I mean, Rishi Sunak is talking about a recession the like of which we've never known coming down the track, and is spending an absolute fortune on bailing out, on supporting companies and on furlough schemes. Can we really afford to support theatres as well?
Well, what would we lose, Fiona? You know, these organisations are the fabric of our cities, the lifeblood of our society. As a former culture secretary, I just want to agree with Camilla, James and Gerald. This is tremendously important. You know, James said sometimes people are squeamish about arts funding. Well, we're not in Greater Manchester, James. We see the benefit of investing in culture and the arts for what it does to bringing people into the city. So we paid our arts organisations up in advance in terms of the grants they were going to get. We've supported artists through this. And we set up a streaming platform, United We Stream, which has been broadcasting Greater Manchester music and talent around the world. And the money raised through it is supporting venues. So, no, you don't need to convince us. But, Fiona, I want to also say something about the sporting life of the country, because there's this drive to get the Premier League back. But I'm very worried about what is going to happen to lower league football clubs if they have to play behind closed doors. Now, of course, there's a lot more private money in football, but I believe we need to see the Premier League setting up a football solidarity fund so that the whole of the football pyramid can be supported through this, because it won't just be theatres that are going dark. We will see lower league football clubs going out of business one after another. And I think, you know, in the case of the culture and the arts, yes, there's a big place for the government to step in, because in the end, we've got to protect as much of our economy so that we can bounce back more quickly. But when it comes to football, I think the Premier League's got to step forward and protect lower league clubs, and it's going to be crucial to keeping them in business. OK, well, you've made your appeal. Let's see if the Premier League respond. And Helle, I'm thinking in Denmark, given that the lockdown was relatively short and not particularly strict, was
bailing out theatres an issue?
Yes, it is an issue, and there's been a lot of debate about culture, the way the cultural life plays a role when we're all in lockdown. And also, I think people are appreciating culture more. There's common singing. I mean, there has been a lot of culture in the UK as well, and I think we all appreciate that. And I would agree. I mean, I think the biggest thing for theatres and all other institutions is to know what's going to happen, because they won't be able to ramp up. They'll probably have to run with 30% in the beginning, and then they can ramp up slowly into 21. But they need to know. And if a theatre said in January 21, we're going to have this show on, I think many people will book the tickets because we want to get back.
Of course, and the question for me as well is, and I sort of resist the term a bailout, because it really actually is. It is an investment for the amount of money that these venues in Manchester. Andy, you're right. Like, Manchester's an extraordinary city of music and comedy and theatre and television production. The money we need is to cover the shortfall until we can properly reopen is almost instantly paid back in the annual tax revenue and the VAT. In London alone, tourists bring in £2 billion of cash every year, specifically for London theatre.
Okay, well,
so
let me...
pay for itself. But just finally, Fiona,
Okay.
so I want to agree with Camilla, which is just that the question is, like, what are we ending the lockdown for? Of course, it's to get kids back, and of course, it's to reopen our businesses. But there's a huge part of us, of British people, that is a sociable animal, and in terms of our psychological health and our spirit and our morale, all the care workers who I think we should immediately give a free ticket to go and see a play or a music or two, I think that is such a vital part of our national life, and we can completely contribute to that. But in order to do that, we need to be saved in the interim.
Well, let me just... we've had a couple of tweets in from Graham. Realistically, how can theatres continue to exist in the current climate with tours and performances cancelled month by month? Will we see pantomime? There you go, Camilla. Or theatre resume this year? I think that's what you're referring to at Christmas.
No, I'm not.
No, OK. Nothing wrong with panto. If theatres are lost as the Sondheim Society, our cultural heritage and voices diminished and creative voices silenced, heartbreaking art isn't easy, never more so than now. So, Chris, can you see the government extending a lifeline to theatres?
Well, I mean, first of all, I completely accept everything that James and Gerald are saying about the importance of the arts sector. I mean, clearly it's a huge economic contributor, as James very powerfully set out, but it's so much more than that. It enriches our cultural lives. It gives entertainment, it gives meaning, it attracts tourists to this country.
So given that, can you see the government extending a helping hand? So
let me take that question in two parts. So in terms of what we've done already, I would obviously strongly encourage every arts organisation to fully use all of the existing schemes. James mentioned the furlough scheme already. Every organisation in the position of, for example, a theatre should be using that scheme to have their staff who can't work paid at 80% of their regular salary, and the government is funding that and has recently extended it. There are significant loan schemes available, and the government's backed loan schemes that have paid out now over £20 billion. So again, I would encourage the arts to use that.
There's no question that the government has made a massive outlay when it comes to trying to support businesses, but there are a lot of people who are employed in the theatre who can't access the furlough scheme, and a lot of theatres are saying that the loans just don't really apply to them, so which is why they're asking for more money. So I'm just asking you, is there anything additional you think the government might do?
They clearly are eligible for the loans, but I mean, just yesterday, Oliver Dowden, the Culture Secretary, announced the creation of a task force specifically to look into the issues that James and Gerald are raising. Clearly, the arts sector does have a unique set of circumstances. It is going to be the most difficult to restart for obvious reasons, and this task force, launched yesterday, is designed to address exactly these issues. But I hope, again, as we get through this situation, as the science improves and we get things like antibody testing, and if the antibody testing is rolled out and there is some level of immunity, which we hope, we can't be certain, but we hope there will be, people who have those antibodies and that immunity, probably can go to the theatre. So I think science, again, can really help us here get through this. But in the meantime, that task force is here to help with exactly what James and Gerald are raising. I just want to try and squeeze in one more question, if I can, which is a pre-recorded question. Gerald, thank you very much for joining us. This question is from Akash Lal.
Would you rather eat a sandwich made by someone wearing a nice smile or by someone wearing a face mask?
Oh, so back to the face mask, because that dominated conversation about corona for some time. So we've now got a situation where the government is advising people to wear face coverings if they're in an enclosed situation indoors where they can't easily socially distance, but otherwise, no. I mean, Camilla? What's your view?
Well, the jury is out on face masks, and this is the trouble. The government had to say face coverings because they didn't want members of the public buying up surgical masks that could be used by frontline NHS and carers.
But would you rather have a sandwich served to you by someone wearing a face mask?
I'd like to have a sandwich served by somebody who was obeying hygiene rules in general, and I think we've all learnt a lot about the value of hand washing in the last 2 months.
But specifically that question.
I wouldn't mind either way.
Okay.
They can wear a face mask or they can choose not to. What's interesting is some of the evidence that went into SAGE, which I think came from the Royal Society, said one psychological benefit of wearing face masks in public, particularly on transport in supermarkets, is it reminded people of the need to distance. And actually that's important. So on the balance of probability, the jury's out, and they could help, they might not. But actually, if you think it helps to stop transmission to others, and if you think it helps because it puts you off getting too close in public transport and elsewhere, then it's probably no bad thing.
I mean, it's a fascinating one, isn't it? Because in Germany, for example, it's compulsory to wear a mask on public transport while you're shopping. In Spain, they're they're compulsory in indoor public spaces, and even in outdoor ones if you can't maintain a social distance. In Denmark, you've not gone along with the whole face mask, face covering thing.
I think it's not part of our culture, as it isn't here either, and in many ways it's something that makes people a little bit scared to see this face masks, but I don't know enough about the science behind it, so I don't have a strong opinion about it. What I will say is that I think we have to have a deep conversation, and I hope the government will start that soon, a deep conversation about what is the new normal? How are we going to live together the next year, for example? And I think we have to have new international standards of travelling on planes, on commuter trains in the morning. We have to have new standards, and I would hope that the UK could also be a leader in this globally, because this is almost like after 9/11, where everything changed in terms of how we were travelling across the world, and it's the same moment now, and we need new standards for everything. It doesn't have to be exactly the same in all countries, but I think we need to understand this new normal, and that's why I'm hoping. I heard you before getting a little bit defensive about what the government has done and has not done. I hope that we can get into a situation where we all can recognise this is a new situation. Mistakes have been made. I will take responsibility as Prime Minister that we did not prepare properly for a pandemic like this. We had SARS, we had the swine flu, we had all these things, but we still didn't prepare properly. And I don't think the British government did either, as any government that we know apart from the Asian. So we have to be in a mode where we breathe and say, now it's a new normal. We all have to be part of doing that and talking about how we want to do that and get out of this automatic reaction where we say we didn't do anything wrong and surely we can't find a fault with anything. After all this, we also have to evaluate and create new standards together.
James, coming back to the question, would you rather be served by someone?
Oh, I didn't answer that question.
No, you didn't. But I get, face mask. You're not keen on face mask. I get that. But would you rather be served by someone wearing a face mask or not? Oh
God, can't wait just to be served by someone. A sandwich or a pint will go down a treat right now. I agree. It's not. It doesn't. I wear one occasionally, mainly to make other people around me feel comfortable. I think we would get used to it. I think it would become the new normal. I think it's individual choice, and I don't know how you would legislate for it.
Andy, where do you stand on the discussion about face coverings or face masks?
Well, I think we're going to have to work quite hard to build confidence amongst the public to go back into cities and support the cultural venues and the bars and restaurants, as we were discussing a moment ago. And if they can help build that confidence, then why not? I mean, sometimes people can see a face mask and think it's someone being distrustful of everybody around them. But as James just said, it's the opposite. It's quite a public-spirited thing to do, because obviously it's reducing the risk of you giving the infection to other people. So I think we should explain more about it, why it's a good thing and why people are probably going to have to expect to see more of it. I certainly feel in our city we need to build a clear reputation for being a safety-first city to get the visitors to come back. And I've been saying to the fashion industry, we're renowned for our music and our fashion as well. Let's design the must-have Manchester face mask that sells around the world. Let's make something of this. Let's make something positive out of it. So I kind of feel that we probably should look at what other countries are doing and encourage the use more. Certainly on public transport, we're saying that it is the right thing to do, just so that there's confidence amongst all of the travelling public and no disagreements between some people wearing masks and some people not. So,
and have you worn one yet, Andy?
If they bring any benefit at all, as I think they do, we should probably just embrace them and encourage it.
And have you worn one yet, Andy?
No, I haven't. I'll be honest, but I haven't been out very much. I've been home based like everybody else. But I'd be more than happy to set that example. And yeah, I think it's about being public spirited, I think, as James said, and that's the key behind face coverings or masks.
So originally the government was suggesting that face coverings were not necessary and might actually give a false sense of confidence. And then the government decided that actually when it came to enclosed spaces, such as public transport, for example, that face coverings are advised. Seeing how many people are wearing face coverings on public transport at the moment, the reports seem to be pretty mixed. Are you happy with the way that's going?
Well, I think in terms of the advice, it will evolve and change over time, particularly as scientific advice gets updated. I think people should wear face coverings on public transport. I think it is a good idea.
Because lots of people still aren't doing
that. Yeah, well, but I would just advise them to wear it, as Andy said a moment ago. I think there is a fair chance it will help. If they happen to have coronavirus, it'll potentially stop it from transmitting. I think it gives people confidence to go onto public transport if they see other people are being careful. It also just serves as a kind of prompt, a reminder that we're not in life as normal at the moment. We do need to behave differently, wash our hands more frequently, be careful, stay alert as at the moment. And then the face covering serves as a sort of reminder. On the very specific question about if I was having a sandwich or being served a sandwich, even better, then I think I would want that person to be following the guidance and wearing a face mask. But I think you can still smile, and the person you're talking to can still see your smile.
You can't see it so easily, can you?
People can smile with their eyes as well. And I think if someone's smiling at you properly, you can tell they're smiling, even if they're wearing a face mask.
So at the moment, it's a recommendation on the part of the government and in enclosed spaces. Can you see it going further than that?
Well, again, I think we have to be guided by the scientific advice, and if there is compelling evidence that it should be compulsory in the future, I'm sure the government would follow that advice. But it really must, as always, be led by the science, and that applies here as much as it applies in all the other areas we've talked about this evening.
So just out of interest, who here has worn a face mask or face covering so far?
I haven't worn one yet, but I have a friend in the village has made me and my husband one.
A matching pair of masks.
For when we go back on the tube, and I would wear it, I think, on the tube, yeah.
Well, I hope that mask would match the pyjamas that you were supposed to be wearing into the studio this evening. So Camilla did a poll online before she came into the programme saying, what shall I wear a question time tonight? And the overwhelming vote was for pyjamas. But look.
I don't have respectable enough pyjamas. But now that poll has happened, I think I must invest in some proper silk ones, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Camilla, promise me that when you come back on the programme, you'll be in your gym jams next time.
Maybe if it's comic relief or something.
The nation awaits with bated breath. Right, on that note, our hour is up. So tonight, our questions came from the London area. Next week, we're looking for questions from people living in or near Glasgow, and the week after that from Southampton. Now, from next week, we're going to do things a little bit differently. Obviously, we can't have the normal audience here as we have done for all the years that Question Time's been going, but we are going to have a virtual audience all the way through the programme. I have to say, I'm very much looking forward to it. So we are looking for 12 people to join in the discussion next week via video links. You'll join in and you'll be part of the programme the whole way through. So to do that, you just go to the Question Time website and you apply in the usual way, and then we will get back to you and we'll take it from there. And of course, if you want to join in the discussion we'll be having tonight, you can carry that on with Adrian Charles and guests on Question Time Extra Time, which is on 5 Live now, as it always is. But for now, thank you very much to all of you, to my panel, for coming in here this evening. Andy, thank you very much for joining us from Manchester. Thank you for those of you who joined us live. Very grateful for your questions, and of course, all of those of you who joined in the conversation on social media as well. For this week, from Question Time, bye-bye.
We've got to be able to be more open and more able to talk about stuff.
Let it out. There's people out there that can help you. It feels